Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Kroll, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Google Classroom and Distance Learning Management Systems, or DLMS. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, if anyone caught in the alphabet soup, I have a little joke down there, the fellow promotable status. I was accepted recently for my mastership in the Academy of General Dentistry, and I'm not allowed to officially use that until I go to the convocation ceremony in June. But due to COVID and my military status, I joke that I'm in a promotable fellowship status until that time. But I'm humbled and honored to be speaking to this group of educators here today. I'd like to go ahead and give you my disclaimer. These are definitely my views, and they do not reflect the official views of the Department of Defense or other departments of the United States government. I have zero financial interest in any of the companies or products or materials that I discuss in this presentation today. So anyone who's been in the military for more than a year has probably been asked by people, what lessons have you learned so far from your military career? One thing I just even think about looking at this picture, 10 years ago, I had no idea what a wireframe or an STL file was, and now I'm using it as the PowerPoint background for this presentation here today. So I think it's kind of interesting and leads me to my 3 simple lessons that I've learned from my military career. You always have to be willing to learn, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of who may be teaching. Even if it's commander's call and it's the last presentation of the day, we always have to be willing to learn. We want to keep an open mind because there's always going to be new techniques, new procedures that come along that maybe are better than the way we did it in the first place. So keeping an open mind has always been an important thing for me in the military and as I move forward onto a civilian career. We don't want to stand with our backs to the water, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means here in a second. So just so I don't have shameless plugs of where I live and my children, I'll incorporate them into my lessons learned from my military career. So we started our career in the beautiful Pacific Northwest and spent about 7 years on a detour out in Texas and Oklahoma. So in driving from the Pacific Northwest to Texas, this was driving through the Panhandle. And I really got a little sad, and had to keep in mind that I was willing to learn, and I had to keep repeating that to myself, that I was willing, and I volunteered to go to Fort Hood, Texas to do a 2-year AEGD program. I'm glad I kept an open mind because it was an excellent program. Raised 2 wonderful kids in that part of the country. You can tell one of them was born in Oklahoma, the other was born in Texas, and you can probably tell from this picture right here which one was born in Oklahoma and which one was born in Texas, just by the fact that one of them is very unhappy to be in an Oklahoma jersey. You have to keep an open mind. Just because something doesn't seem great on paper or it's new to you doesn't mean it's going to be life-changing and an excellent opportunity. So moving forward in my military career, looking at beautiful Fort Sill, Oklahoma, actually turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened. It was an excellent educational experience and had some very beautiful landscape right out my backyard. This is the Wichita Mountain Wildlife Refuge, looking out west at that beautiful southwest sunset. And then don't stand with your back to the water. So what I mean by this is change is going to happen. Life is going to throw you a curveball, and if you don't plan for it, you're going to end up flat on your face. So here's an example of my children posing for a picture with their mom out in the beautiful Carmel Beach in Carmel, California, near our current duty location. And as you can tell, they have their back to the water. And that wave is rapidly approaching. And you can see that the sand they're setting in is wet sand. So even though it looks beautiful and it looks picturesque, if you don't pay attention to the signs around you and you have your back to the water, you can end up, like my daughter, covered in sand and wet from head to toe. So why do I think that these are 3 valuable lessons in talking about digital learning management? Well, the reason I like to talk about them is because COVID-19 kind of took a lot of us by surprise. We had to be willing to learn. We had to keep an open mind, And if we had our backs to the water and got hit with a disruption to our program, it was a very, very dirty and many of us felt like we got smashed by a wave when it came to the amount of knowledge that we had to learn about digital online learning management systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my objectives and my outlines. So a basic introduction to who are my learners, where did we start, a basic one-slide crash course introduction into online learning management, and finally a basic overview of Google Classroom, culminating in some questions at the end of the presentation. So who are my learners? So a lot of people say, oh, those millennials, the hipsters, the group born 1981 to 1995. If you want to learn more about that generation and haven't heard enough about them already, feel free to take out your smartphone. For the non-hipsters in the room, the smartphone is the thing sitting in your pocket that may receive phone calls and have a camera on it. You're going to open your camera, shine it at the QR code, focus on that QR code, and it should automatically bring up a menu that takes you to a Pew Research study on what millennials are, kind of what we know about this generation of folks so far, and what we still have to learn. Some of the newer folks that we have that are coming to our residency programs are the Gen Z or the Zoomers or the first digitally native group that we have in American society. So these are the folks that kind of grew up with screens. They grew up with digital technology. They may not be proficient at it, but it's been a part of their life since day one. Again, if you want to learn more about this generation of learners, you can go ahead and click on the QR code, take a picture of the QR code, and it'll take you to another Pew Research study that tells you what we know about them so far as well. If you don't go to the QR codes, or you happen to be, as my young niece refers to anyone older than her as a boomer, if you happen to be a boomer and haven't figured out how to work the smartphone on your camera yet, this is really the main takeaway that I want you to learn from my presentation today. When we look at this younger group of individuals, about 45% are almost constantly using their social media platforms when we look at younger adults. And the majority of them are either constantly or several times a day using it. So obviously it's a huge shift from probably what we saw when we were all in our teenage years. So that brings me back, where did we start? Okay, so I obviously didn't use a smartphone or social media constantly when I was growing up. So there's a saying in the military that we often follow that says it's always common that we, as soldiers and generals, always prepare to fight the last soldiers or the last general's war. And what does that tell me? That's a quote by Edward P. Warner, but there's been many military historians that have quoted the same thing. We learn the way that our mentors learned when I think about dental education. Okay, they prepared by the way that they were taught and the things that they wanted to learn. But as we get older and as we get more seasoned in our careers, we tend to maybe not change with the new generation of learners that we have. If we look at a classic quote that was re-quoted by Dwight Eisenhower in a slightly different way, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, by the Prussian general Helmuth von Moltke. What does that mean? Okay, well, that means we must have a plan, but the plan is seldom what we stick to. Okay, so when I think about that, it really hits home with COVID. Okay, we learned the way our mentors learn. We maybe made minor adaptations. And if we didn't have a digital learning plan back then, before COVID, we definitely have one now. And that makes us think what's to come in the future and how are we going to have to permanently augment our classroom to not only cater to our learners, but also think about what could happen next. So I use, for an example, the PFMs you saw on the back of the screen, and looking at the chairside dentistry that we do now. What used to take weeks takes hours. And that is something that younger generations expect, instant gratification, things that we want to deliver to our patients, and also things that we want to deliver to our learners. So what did COVID-19 actually do to our young learners? Well, I found this study that looked at undergraduate dentistry students and what happened during their 2 weeks of isolation during COVID. If you want the link to the full text, again, take out your smartphone, open your camera app, and go to the QR code at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and that will actually go ahead and get you to the full text article. What this study really shows is that high quality of life was prevalent and significantly higher among students with virtual meetings as opposed to students that had distance learning without virtual meetings. So that brings us into things like Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, and Zoom. These things are important in making us feel that human connection to our education. But where does that human connection occur? Well, the most used device still is our computer, but also followed very closely and almost identically to the cell phone. Okay, so when they actually looked at where computers and cell phones are being used for educational purposes, it was actually primarily in the bedroom as the place of dental education. Now, for all of the sleep folks in the room, I wonder how that's going to affect people's sleep. And I think that'd be a really excellent thing to think about because I feel like when the classroom enters the bedroom, it also disrupts my sleep patterns. I feel like through online platforms, you never truly sleep because there's always education at your fingertips that's always going around the world. So even when you're asleep, education in the dental community keeps on going. So the most used device is the computer and cell phone, and it most likely occurs in the bedroom. But when we really look at the study, the quality of accessible distance learning and the perceived interactions through the access device play a role in the perceived quality of life. So, okay, why does that make us think about a learning management system? Well, we know we need to have one because we know that our learners through COVID, and they've gotten used to this in dental school, may expect us to have some form of online presence. So an online learning management system or software is used to plan, execute, and assess a specific learning process. eLearningIndustry.com also broke it down a little bit further, saying it has to aid in the administration, documentation, tracking, and recording of your learning environment. So when you hear all this, you think, Microsoft Teams, it's what we use here. And absolutely, I never saw Microsoft Teams coming. When COVID happened, we had already developed a robust Google Classroom a few years prior. So Microsoft Teams, I was not an early adopter of Microsoft Teams because we had a lot of hiccups at the beginning, and anyone who's been part of a Microsoft Teams webinar since has realized we still haven't necessarily worked through all those hiccups quite yet. But really, there's two main points that we want to take away: cost and anywhere learning. Okay, I'm in the military. I don't make a lot of money. I want it to be free or next to free. I want anywhere learning. I want my students to be able to pick up their smartphone and watch a video. I want my students to be able to be at home on their couch or be at their desk in their bedroom if they've got roommates, accessing their learning platforms. So that way they can have an educational experience that meets their specific needs. Selfishly, I also like things that are really easy. I don't like to administer and have a lot of unnecessary steps. Maybe that's why I like digital dentistry. I don't like to mess around with stone and gypsum in the lab for hours at a time. I like my processes to be digitized and automated whenever possible. And this really reduces the lead time on the administration of my program. So if you miss anything here, again, you can go to this QR code, and from here, you can access a lecture or a quick video that I made for the students of the DFDC, or the Dental Faculty Development course for UShoes, that broke down kind of the immediate post-COVID usage of Google Classroom at the Fort Sill AEGD program. From here, what I want to do is take you out of this screen and take you into the digital learning environment. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now isn't actually residency related. It's how I use this program now that I'm out of dental education and I'm working with other organizations. So I volunteer for the Academy of General Dentistry Army constituency, and I've created a digital education portal for them. And to me, it all starts with a website, right? We want to have a digital footprint that people can easily find us. Within our digital footprint, whether it is through a residency program, which those are often easily accessed through your public affairs office, you can discuss with the actual installation, and they can give you a sub-page that's already search engine optimized, so students or prospective students can easily find your AEGD or GPR or other postgraduate program. These are nice because search engine optimization is something that's not free, and it's something that CODA looks for. How do you advertise your AEGD program to prospective residents? So if you have a paid version of Google Suite, which it's relatively inexpensive, you can actually have access to Google Sites, and you can generate your own website that's easily modified, even for folks that don't know HTML language. So for our constituents, we have our member education classroom, which we can request access to here, which gets routed to our secretary to verify their membership, and then ultimately to our CE classroom, which looks something like this. Inside of our CE classroom, we have different learning modules, okay, depending on who the individual is going to be, who's going to be accessing this learning module. So for these classes, you can see we've got a military installation that actually used our services for a short course. We have a potential mastership course that we're planning, a fellowship review course that we would eventually like to have. But then right now, we're developing our continuing education classroom for our members. Okay, so within this, if you're using this for your residency program, this last screen that I took you to could be individual years of classes. So 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 for your residency classes. And start to develop an online curriculum, an online tracked gradebook, which you can see here if I open my Fort Sill 2019-2020 archived class. And this has every interaction we had with the learner through the entire year for every single assignment that we gave them the entire year. So they can go back in chronological order and access anything that we discussed, which is awesome. Okay, so when we use a not free version of this, there's a few more things we can tie into it. Things like automatic certificate generation. So for a CE environment that's all kind of a distance learning perspective, you can see that we would open up something like restoration of endodontically treated teeth, a video, a course evaluation, and a quiz. From there, people can turn it in, or we can have automatic certificate generation through something called Certifiums. So for the CE environment, I don't make people hand in assignments. For a residency environment, we did have people actually hand in assignments. So if we went into our COVID curriculum, you can see it tells us who turned in the assignment, who did not turn in the assignment, and let me see if I can find one restoratively. Where we've got 8 graded assignments. So here, under the restorative hands-on course, we actually went ahead and put in our 8 graded assignments. From here, this goes automatically to our student's email address. We have what we need the learner to do based on each individual week. We give them due dates, course review material, and literature. From there, the learner, which would be accessed under the people portal, it'll show us who's actually in our course. We can actually go to our gradebook and look and see at our assignments, which we have had handed in to this date and time. So overall, it was a great way for us to kind of track assignments that we did during the COVID type of era. You can see that we even were able to pull in other services. So we were able to utilize the expertise of Colonel Klingman to come in and do some Zoom presentations for our classroom and give our residents a really in-person whiteboard experience with a very engaging oral pathologist. It was an excellent learning environment for our learners. Overall, to us, because we had this robust Google Classroom that had already been developed, our transition to the COVID time was a lot easier. But what that really spun into for me was being able to reach out to our global audience for our Army constituency and start creating and servicing our members that we have for the Army. So we've got our stream of what services we have available. And again, this is for a short course that was done at the Fort Eustis Quad Service CE event. But if we go back even further, you can see that we also have a continuing education course. So if we look in here, we've got Lane Ochi just did a presentation for us under the fundamentals of fixed prosthodontics, which was given, and this has an automatic quiz generation. So on here, we've got the videos, the quiz, and the course evaluations. So you've got a lot of possibilities built in with embedded abilities to have video types of presentations for your learners. You also have the ability to spin this out into a CE type of environment. You can tie this in to a website, and everything is self-contained on the Google Drive. Now bringing us back away from Google Classroom and giving you that basic overview on kind of how things run. One thing I want to tell you is my video is about 20 minutes long, but the analytics that we can get for engagement are pretty interesting. You know, people only viewed my 20-minute video for about 9 minutes. So obviously I need to engage my audience a little bit more. But also for our students, this can be important too. We can ask them like, hey, you know, that video, what did you guys think? You know, was it a little bit too long? Did I drone on a little bit? And if they, you know, kind of say, no, you did okay, Doc. Well, you guys only watched the video on average for about 10 minutes. So why weren't you watching the entire CE video? It really lets you know that, you know, Big Brother or the residency director is watching throughout this online distance learning process. The last great thing we can talk about is Microsoft Teams, okay? So I didn't want to recreate a presentation on Microsoft Teams because it would be a little bit misleading since I'm talking about Google Classroom. But overall, the interesting thing here is there's already people that have done this for me. So if you go to this QR code that I've listed here, there is a distance learning guru who posts lots of different videos for different types of flipped classroom types of situations. This QR code will take you to his video on an introduction to Microsoft Teams in the Google Classroom or in the classroom environment. Now for me, if I could do it all over again and learning what I know now, I would probably have transitioned to Microsoft Teams because it's not only accessible for my learners and it's a pretty quick learning curve to be able to access this from your smartphone, but the Microsoft 365 suite that the DoD is looking at integrating actually truly makes this a learning management system. A little bit more workaround as far as grade books and quizzes and evaluations, which can be done through Microsoft Forms. It just takes a little bit more practice. But the flip side is you have better integration to systems we already know, like PowerPoint. Can be a collaborative environment. Word documents can be collaborative. We have access on our government computers, our smartphones, and our home computers. So overall, when we look at the Microsoft Teams environment, it actually is really an excellent type of environment within the DoD. Overall, I'm done with today's presentation, and I just ask if you have any questions to please ask them at this time. Thank you so much.